King Saul had got into a little trouble. Well, major trouble. God had instructed him to completely destroy the Amalekites, but instead, he disobeyed. He destroyed everything he didn't want, but everything he did, including the king of the Amalekites, he spared. Because of this disobedience, King Saul lost favor with God, and the Lord decided that it was time for a sea change. The prophet Samuel, though, is tore up over this. Saul not only represents Samuel's impact as a prophet, but Saul is all Samuel has in mind. Samuel's vision is that of a King Saul. Now that God was ready to hand over the kingdom, Samuel is in mourning. Finally, God asked Samuel in 1 Samuel chapter 16 at the first verse, "How long wilt thou mourn for Saul, seeing I have rejected him from reigning over Israel? Fill your horn with oil and go." Sometimes, due to reasons that are beyond us and we cannot control, God decides to go in a different direction than we anticipated. And it's not easy just to deal with it. It can take some time. It can take some mourning that we have to contend with in order to move forward. But we must move forward. The story of God asking the prophet Samuel, "How long will you mourn?" makes me laugh. Though what I always have to take a minute to pause on is the next thing God says in that passage. God gives Samuel instructions that will result in the next king being appointed. And there's a whole lot of messages I can preach just right there, but I want to talk about the fact that God, as great as he is, as wise as he is, and as mighty as he is, takes the time to give Samuel instructions that will see to it the continuity of what God desires to do. Racism is a sin. It is a stain on our nation's history that some of us don't even like to talk about. But I believe God is so powerful and he is just that not only can we stop denying the past, mourning over what would have been and what we thought, but we have instructions on how to move forward. And we don't have to do it alone. He's guiding us. He's leading us as we work this out together. Do you know what that is? We've implied it a lot so far in this series, but it's fairly simple to point out. Love. Love is how we move forward together. See, through love, we want to understand each other. Love gives us the reason to listen to each other. Love gives us an incentive to live in a community with one another, with God as our leader and working in us through his Spirit, with Jesus Christ as a life example for us to live by. How long will you mourn over what used to be, or what we used to say, or how the price of gas used to cost? How long will we mourn and deny racism and discrimination and injustice from times before, even until now? How long will we choose to live in a world where we continually be okay to accept the things that God rejects? It's time that we get up, that we arise and live out what God has called us to be, and that we are not swayed by the culture of hate and despair, of intolerance and mercilessness. We must be so convicted in our faith in Jesus, so filled with the Spirit of God, that it becomes extremely difficult, if not impossible, to fall out of love with one another. And what would our world look like when that happens? How better could our conversations be? How much more freeing can our circumstances be? How much more open can we be with each other when we know we communicate and chastise in love? What happens when we stop mourning over the loss or the fear of loss of what God is trying to take away from us, but instead walk in his grace and live the life he's called us to live? What happens when we're free?